think about unhealthy foods, French fries are probably one of the first things that come to your mind. What if I told you that there was a type of potato that absorbed less fat when it was fried, making the resulting French fries healthier for you? Sounds pretty good, right? Well, that's just one of the benefits of genetically modified crops. My opponent stated that genetically modified food is a danger to our society, but I do not agree. Rather, they are beneficial to our society. Some of the benefits include they're pest-resistant, herbicide-resistant, disease-resistant, cold-resistant, drought-tolerant, and they have nutritional benefits, such as the French fries that previously stated. My opponent's first secondary claim was that genetically modified foods will cause negative effects to human health. She said that the combination of genetically modified crops designated for animal consumption into produce meant for human consumption has a high possibility for causing health problems. This possibility, not probability, was very thinly supported. She stated that there was an incident in 2000 where traces of Starlink GM crop, which is restricted only for animal consumption, was found in products meant for human consumption. It was not stated why this was bad or what happened as a result, and with further research, I found that no one actually became ill from the incident. No further evidence was offered to show instances of health problems occurring or how serious these potential health problems would be. So we were left to wonder if they were even dangerous at all. She also stated that an increased creation of drug-resistant viruses and bacteria would result from these. To support this, she said that most genetically modified foods are modified using DNA of viruses and bacteria, and that genes used to modify may come from any organism, but in commercial crops, bacteria is the commonest source for these genes. Neither of these statements actually supports the claim that there is an increased creation of drug-resistant viruses or bacteria. It just says that the DNA is used from viruses and bacteria. Her secondary claim was that genetically modified foods present a danger to the environment. She gave an example of the skylark bird being unintentionally harmed by the genetic modification of crops, as the pesticides that the crops resist kill the weeds that the birds need to survive. Firstly, the pesticides are meant to kill weeds, all are meant to kill the weeds. If they didn't, the crops would die as a result, and we would not have anything to eat. I researched the study that she mentioned and found a few flaws. Only one weed and one bird were used in the model, and they presumed that this would reflect a wider range of farmland birds and weeds and their food source. This is a hasty generalization, and using only one sample to represent the vast number of farmland birds and weeds is insufficient. For example, Roger Duncan, a farmer near Hancock, Minnesota, and a strong advocate for the genetically modified herbicide-tolerant GMHT crops, has grown GMHT soybeans and corn crops for 4 years, and the weed Chenopodium album, whose seed is an important food source for farmland birds, is still very abundant after 4 years of him growing these crops. In addition, another solution to the skylark problem was ignored. Both GMHT and non-GMHT systems can be modified to favor biodiversity. Field patches can be left unsprayed to provide food for the skylark chicks, and selective spraying can be used to help maintain the food source. She also stated, finally, that genetically modified foods can cause mutations in new breeds of drug-resistant weeds and insects. First of all, insects were not actually mentioned in any of her evidence, so I believe that this part of the claim should be ignored. She stated that farmers' almost reliant use of Roundup has led to rapid growth of stubborn new superweeds, and said that Ian Heap said that about 7 million to 10 million acres in the U.S. are affected. I believe she misunderstood the information that she read, as I found this article, and she stated that in reality there are roughly 170 million acres planted with corn, soybean, and cotton, the crops that are most affected. In the article it said that these were the acres with the crops that were affected, but that only 7 to 10 million of these 170 million acres were affected by this. So these just had the crops in the U.S., the 170 million acres. The article also confirmed that this is a relatively small amount that's affected comparatively. In addition, according to the corn and soybean farmer Steve Doster, you can kill the weeds with a product other than Roundup. It may be a pain to mix it in with Roundup, but it doesn't mean that the weeds are unkillable. I believe that my opponent failed to show any legitimate danger to our society and merely stated that small problems that have easy fixes. I hope you will all agree that the benefits of the genetically modified crops far outweigh the negatives.
Well, I like the visualization that you had at the beginning as a counterpoint to the advocate's claim, and then you do a good job indicating what the proposition is, and you go through the individual points. You signpost them very clearly, so we're going through the argument. That's not hard to follow at all. I thought your challenge on the first point, based on the one example that is presented, was pretty thorough. You had some good challenges here, mentioning that it's a single example, no harm was cited, no one became ill, and there hasn't been any illustration since 2000, which I think you could probably point out was in fact a dozen years ago, and these products continue to be available. So it doesn't really seem to suggest that there is a widespread risk on this. And then I did think that you kind of dismissed the argument on the drug-resistant issues as saying that they're not really relevant, that the evidence doesn't apply on that point. I didn't think that was as clear as it needed to be. I had the same problem with your last argument where I thought that it was, you went through this whole thing explaining the acreage and how they didn't understand what the original claim was. I'm not sure I understand what your claim is based on that information. So I think you have a legitimate point there, but I didn't think it was very clearly explained on these points. On the second point, I thought you had, again, a series of excellent responses on the issues being presented, especially the challenge on the one study that uses a very limited database for making their inferences. I do think you want to provide us with a source citation on this. I thought that was a little bit problematic. And then, like I said, on the third point, I think you've got a good argument here, but I didn't think it was presented very clearly. And if the advocate had a problem with clarity on the argument, I'm afraid that you had a similar clarity issue on it. Although I think your point is probably one, if I figured it out the way I think you're trying to explain it, seems reasonable, but it needs to be a lot sharper so that I know exactly that, I don't want to be the one making the argument in my head. You should be the one making the argument that I'm just understanding. All right, thank you.